Welcome once again to Reflections and Canon Andrew White. Andrew, you're in the middle of writing this book. There's some eminent people there.
Book called My Heralds of Glory. The people who really enable me to see the glory of God. And some of the heralds are dead and very important, like John Bunyan. I still read John Bunyan now. And Derek Prince, who was a great friend of mine. I did his funeral. And a lot of the heralds of glory in my life are people that nobody would have heard of. And I want to look at some of the unheard of heralds of glory. And the first I want to look at is a Marine commander called Ian Hearn. Ian and I became great friends during the worst days of the war in Baghdad. He was one of my PSDs, which, for those of you who are not in the spooky land, means a personal security detail. He was one of the people who protected me from all those who wanted to kill me. So Ian Hearn was in my congregation in the palace in Baghdad. The palace was what used to be Saddam Hussein's Republican palace. And the coalition authority took it over when they invaded Iraq in 2003. And I had a church in Baghdad which opened at the same time, an Anglican church, which when I went in, it only had a rat, nobody else. But I also had an amazing congregation which met every Saturday. We were quite good. We were properly Sabbatarian. We kept the Sabbath. And that was when most of the embassy didn't work. So we did church on Saturday. And one of the persons who used to come was a Marine commander called Ian Hearn. And Ian Hearn and I suddenly got on incredibly well. He had been watching a television program on the BBC about the vicar of Baghdad. And one of his friends said to him when he went to Iraq, "Will you get to see the vicar of Baghdad?" And he said, "No, I doubt it. I don't think so." And a week later, he was sitting in my trailer in the green zone in Iraq in a military trailer where I used to have to leave. And we got talking about his life, how he had spent much of his life in Northern Ireland in the most dangerous times. But he'd been around the world, and being in Iraq now was just being in one of the crazy, dangerous zones. Ian came from Bradford in Yorkshire, and I have one interest in Bradford, that it was in Bradford where Smith Wigglesworth, the great revivalist, lived. It was there that my grandfather used to work as his assistant. And to this day, I still have his actual Bible with all his notes in it. And so Ian and I talked about this, and he said, I know about the chapel that he used to run. It had been turned into an Indian restaurant because Bradford has basically become like a little Afghanistan. But the Boland Street Chapel, which was turned into an Indian restaurant, was taken back by Smith Wigglesworth's great-great-granddaughter, who came over from South Africa to try and continue the ministry. And last year, I had an incredibly emotional time when I went to Bradford. Now, I didn't know Smith Wigglesworth's great-great-granddaughter Lynn, but I knew his great-great-grandson, who was called Henry Fardell, because Henry Fardell is my dentist. So I would regularly go to the dentist and hear great stories about dear Smith Wigglesworth from his great-great-grandson. And Ian Herm said to me one day, you've got to come up to Bradford when you come home and see so much of the history. There are still a few people around who remember being in Boland Street Mission. And included in those few were his parents and his father as a Pentecostal pastor. And we went there and we had such an incredible time basking in the glory of God. And Smith Wigglesworth was always the first one to say, it's not the glory of Smith Wigglesworth, it's the glory of God, the glory of the Almighty, the glory of the Anointed One. And I've just lived with that for years. You see, it was only when my grandfather died, or was about to die, he had serious macular degeneration. He couldn't see and he totally lost his eyesight. I knew that my grandfather was the same as Smith Wigglesworth in one area. He was a plumber. So they weren't rich, affluent people. You know, when you look at people like me, you can see I've been a doctor, I've been to lots of universities, I'm a Cambridge Fellow, and I speak in a certain way. But no, these were normal, poor people. And one of the last things that Smith Wigglesworth said to our grandfather is, we may have been plumbers, but our grandchildren are going to be doctors. And so I became a doctor, and his great-grandson became a doctor. And Ian Hearn was part of this whole journey into the miraculous. And we can remember incredible services when the mortar bombs were falling in all around us. And we were stuck there. Everybody was on the ground apart from me, because I have MS and I'm in a wheelchair and I couldn't have got up again if I'd got down on the floor. But they were all in a wheelchair. They were all on the floor and they were praising God. and sing "We Are Not Alone." No, never alone. No, never alone. He promised never to leave us, never to leave us alone. And Ian, my Marine, was one of those people. Ian's not very well at the moment. He's been to the hospital this week. We've both been in hospital this week. I was back in hospital again, but God still speaks and uses people who are ill. It doesn't matter whether you're super fit and Mr. Strong or super weak and Mr. Weary. What we are is as supernatural children of the Heavenly King. And that's what Smith Wigglesworth tried to teach us. And that's what became clear to my commander from the Marines. No, never alone. No, never alone. He promises never to leave us alone. So I hope that one day Ian will be able to join us on this video. If it wasn't that he had just come out of hospital, he would have been with us today. I've just come out of hospital 2 days ago as well, but they've managed to get me going again, and so I'm here. So I wanted to speak today in my reflections about two people in Herne, but there's one other lady, and she is called Elaine Trimmitt Glover. Now, Elaine was somebody who was from a very humble background. She had had involvement with Christian things. She had had a husband who had cerebral palsy and was in a wheelchair and couldn't walk or do anything. And I went to speak in Leicester one day on my way back from Bradford, stopped at Leicester University to lecture. And I met this lady and she was amazing. And I didn't involve myself with her much. I didn't talk much about her. But I remember her saying, I have nothing to do but be a cleaner. She basically cleaned up old shops. And she said to God one day, is this all you have for me to do? And that very day that she said that to God, God said to me, remember the lady you met in Leicester? She is now down near Southampton. I had a very big job on. Saddam Hussein was tried by a judge who was a Supreme Court judge of Kurdistan called Judge Raouf. Now, I was one of the observers throughout much of the trial of Saddam, observing on behalf of the CPA, the Coalition Provisional Authority. So I was one of the people watching to see that we gave him a fair trial. There were so many trials as up for it, but basically he was accused of being a mass criminal who had literally brought down thousands of people. In particular, he reached out in chemical warfare to a place called Halabja. Now, Halabja is just as you leave central Iraq and go into Kurdistan. And the Chief Justice, who was then taken on to sentence Saddam, was Chief Justice Judge Raouf. And Judge Raouf was a man I looked at for many days, never talked to. But after he was caught up in the trial and after he had sentenced Saddam, he sent message one of his staff to get me. Because evidently they said, who is that man who's always here? And they said, he's a priest and a doctor from England. And Judge Raouf said, I want to see him. He had a very serious neck problem in his neck. He has something called cervical sclerosis. So he had extreme narrowing and inflammation of his spinal cord was being destroyed by this disease in his neck. So he wanted to know if I knew of anybody who could do this operation on him. There were various good surgeons in Iraq, but what scared Judge Raouf was that he had sentenced Saddam to death, and Saddam still had a lot of people from his secret service called the Ba'ath Party, and they wanted to kill Judge Raouf because of what he had done to the man who had protected them. So Judge Raouf says to me, do you know anybody who can do this kind of a surgery? I said, well, it just so happens I do. He said, can you arrange for this surgery to be done? So I came back and I investigated, and I discovered that there was a surgeon in Southampton. Southampton has a very, very good university hospital, and they worked in private clinics around. And he was called Dr. Ali. Now, Dr. Ali was originally from a Persian family, what most people would call Iranian. But we said yes, see Dr. Ali, and Dr. Ali said this is a very big, serious operation, but we can do it. Now, I had nobody who lived in Southampton that I knew. I knew that Elaine Glover, the cleaner from Leicester, had moved down to that area. So I phoned her up one day and said, Elaine, I know this might surprise you, but I would like you to look after a very, very important judge. He has just overseen the biggest criminal case in history, sentenced Saddam Hussein to death. He's got to come to England for major surgery. Yes, I will be there, but I'm not on site. I said to Elaine, would you be willing to look after Mr. Ralph and his family? And she said, I don't believe this. I was just saying to God, is this all you want me to do, to be a cleaner? And now you're asking me to look after this judge who's coming here with massive bodyguards and security. And he had these mega black armored vehicles. And my other great friend there who recently died run an antique shop, and he had a little yellow car like Del Boy, only fools and horses. And so between them, he was helping as well. And Elaine took on this job of looking after Chief Justice Ralph. And she said that was God's biggest inspiration to her. That God said, yes, I do have more for you to do. I have a huge task. I want you to be an international figure. And from being a little cleaner, she looked after the biggest judge in history. And then she looked after his family. She prayed for them. She loved them. And then she went to stay with their family in Kurdistan, in a very highly secure area called the English Village. There was nothing English about it. But how God can take people from any background or position, how God can take you, my friend, who's listening today, and he says to you, I have an even bigger job for you to do. This is amazing. No, never alone. We are never alone, and God has mighty things in store for us. And I don't know where you all are and where you're listening from. I know the program goes all around the world. And if you know how you can get a message back to Rodney and have any subject you'd like me to look at in the future, I will be delighted to do that, because we have a wonderful God, and this service is a unique opportunity to share what God is doing throughout the world. I bless you. I thank you. I thank you for being my viewer, my listener, my friend. We will meet again. Amen.
Thank you for that, Andrew. Fascinating stuff. We'll put at the end of the program an email, my email direct to me, and we hope people will feel free to contact us and give us something that we will chat about next time. Thank you so much. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you, dear Rodney.